Welcome to another Bible in a Year Q&A. So this is for the March 1st through 15th Q&A. So first I had the question last time regarding, I wanted to see if anybody had any thoughts on why they thought that Moses got kicked out, what exactly the reason why. So I got some responses. So thank you for these kind of thoughts. One of them was just the sin of disobedience. So Moses was instructed to speak to the rock, and he struck it with his rod instead. That seems, and then, let's see, another sin of pride. Moses said, shall we bring water out of this rock for you? He didn't give glory to God, but rather took the credit for himself, and Aaron just stood by and did nothing. Potential spam. I don't think I'll take it. All right. Give glory to God. And then another thought was sin of rebellion and putting God to the test. So in Deuteronomy 1:37, Moses says he's not to enter the promised land because of the rebellion of the people, in which he and Aaron participated. So, yeah, I mean, in terms of he disobeyed God, it's even in Deuteronomy 1:37, it also almost seems like Moses is like, I can't enter because of you people, on account of you guys. Like, you guys made me angry, made me disobey God, and so thank you on that. So here I'm going to go through the questions here. Start with here we go. Numbers chapter 6, verse 2, regarding the Nazarite vow, a vow of a Nazarite. So this was a Nazarite vow, this idea of, it's kind of a temporary consecration to God. We have religious, and as Catholics we have religious brothers and sisters, those in consecrated life. A Nazarite was kind of a temporary consecration. I mean, it could be extended long, kind of almost perpetually, but that's what it was. So there's almost a sense of there's already this group of people, there's this consecrated life in the covenant, in the Old Testament, and in the life of Israel, which the life Israel, it's called the assembly. One of the in terms of the gathering, the assembly, the kahal in Hebrew, which is actually in the Greek Old Testament, that's ecclesia, where we get the word church. So this idea, when we see the people of Israel, the church, we use church, it's a derivative from German, but the Greek for church is ecclesia, those who are called, assembled. So in the Old Testament, the church is Israel. So I think it's very important. So this aspect of the this idea, there's this kind of, the church is the fulfillment, kind of the full growth, the fulfillment of the Old Testament. And so God's people in the Old Testament, that's his church. And then it's kind of new level with Christ coming and the new covenant through his death and resurrection. So Nazarite, these temporary consecrated vows that they take kind of for the Lord. Samson actually is a Nazarite in the book of Judges. When we get to the book of Judges, he's not a very good example, though. All right, you may have children's books, stay away from a lot of the his vices and such. But we'll get there. Verse 6 later on with the Nazarite, why are they unclean if they go near a dead body? So you'd be unclean in contact with life or death. When we went through Leviticus, this kind of question came, uncleanness and stuff. So it's contact with death can make one ritually unclean. But in particular, those that are consecrated to the Lord, kind of consecrated as Nazarites, or those of the priests, the Levites and stuff, because they have to attend to worship, they were to be separated. Holiness is kind of the separate. They were set apart for the Lord, and so there were certain things they were not to engage in at all. And so one of these things was kind of going near a dead body. There were certain exceptions with priests and stuff, like relatives, but if they're like our immediate relative, you can't. What's that all about? Well, it's just they're set apart for worship of God, and this kind of ritual actually ritual pure, to remain ritually pure, so that they can kind of fully dedicate their life to the Lord in a certain way. It's maybe a helpful analogy would be like as a priest. Okay, there's certain things a priest can do, and there's certain things that are like that's just kind of yeah, that's not wrong in and of itself, but that's just weird. For example, like the stock market. All right, so a priest who's like, well, I go on the stock market, and I sell bonds. Like, no, 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 I'm a priest. You should be doing things to glorify the Lord, whether that's in a parish, teaching, the stock market. Like, that's just not a place for like somebody who's a priest. Okay, you might say, well, I want to get in, make connection. But no, that just doesn't jive. All right, I don't know if there's anything in canon law about that necessarily, but that just wouldn't make it'd be inconsistent with my priest's call to live for the Lord, to be trading stocks. But a layperson, I mean, that could be that's maybe their job and such, and that's so it's let's see here. Number 7. What is the significance of all these offerings, their weights and their numbers? So it goes through these different these offerings that they make of the leaders of each of the 12 tribes. And I think it's important that it goes through each tribe, and they all have to make the same offerings like subsequent days, and so I don't. The numbering and exactly why is it 2 here of these and 5 of these and 70 shekels of these? I think it's more just there's a consistency amongst all the tribes, even though the tribes are not all equal in size, which is kind of some of them as the beginning of Numbers. It speaks of the tribes they don't have all the equal populations, but they all have to give the same gift, kind of same amount. You may say that's not fair, but but they're for kind of status of a tribe and kind of this idea of they give the same gift, same offering, regardless of their size, of the size of this tribe versus that tribe. So that's more, I think, not to get boggled down with kind of why exactly is it 70 shekels, or the bigger picture is all the tribes are offering the same sacrifice, and so there's a certain quality amongst them of what they have to offer God. What does because they buried the people who had the craving mean? From Numbers 11 verse 34. So this refers to the craving. There refers to the quail. God sends the quail. They're complaining. We're sick of this manna. We want some meat. And so so God's like, fine, I'll send quail in the evening, and they get it, and then some of them are struck dead. There's kind of a plague that goes on. It describes coming out of their nostrils, and it seems the glutton, like this idea of the craving here. Some translations will have it as older English translations will have it like they had the lusting, or it's really this bodily pleasure. They had God; He was giving them spiritual nourishment, but they had the word there for craving. The Hebrew points to this deep desire, longing. They didn't have a deep those that were buried because they had this deep longing for food, physical food, and not for the Lord. So that's where they're essentially their idol was food, instead of worshiping God. So it's referring to, that seems to be what the craving is. They had this inordinate, disordered desire for food. Not just God was providing for them sufficiently, and they just decided, well, we want to live for food. Numbers 18 verse 7. Anyone else who comes near shall be put to death. Why after the plague? So there's a plague. This is kind of, there's a number of, in Numbers, groups that come up and say, Moses, it's not fair that you're the leader, or Aaron, it's not fair that Aaron and they're the only ones that can be priests. This should change. So there's opposition to the leadership that God has appointed. And so there's a play that comes down, and then after that they put the staffs. Each tribe puts a staff in, and they put their names on it, and Aaron puts one in for the tribe of Levi, and Aaron's staff buds kind of got in front of the Ark of the Covenant, and God's kind of reaffirming, like, no, that's where the priesthood is. That's where it's been designated. And then it says, anyone else who comes near shall be put to death. So it's referring to the sanctuary, like that's been given to the Levites, and then particular the priests are the ones that do the offering. Anybody else who isn't part of that kind of shall be put to death. It's the holiness of there. It's like you can't be like, I'm from the tribe of Gad or Asher or Judah, and I want to be a priest. Or it's like under the Old Testament that was Aaron and his descendants were the priests, and so that's what there's this rebellion against the structure that God has set up, and not wanting to say, okay, this is what God has given us, and well, we're going to cooperate with it. Why did Aaron die? Numbers 20, chapter 20, verse 27 to 29. Why did Aaron die on Mount Hor? And did they bring his body with them when they came down? Why he died on Mount Hor is the certain mountain, high hill. Why that mountain in particular, I don't know. There doesn't seem to be any clear indication of why it's that mountain. But did they take his body? It seems like he died on the mountain. So there's this image. This is what happened to Moses too. So it seems like his body just remains up there. Numbers 21 to chapter 21. They had no food or water, but stopped to make a serpent of bronze. When if they just quit complaining, God wouldn't punish them. Well, yeah, if they didn't complain in the first place about the food, bread and water that God was giving them, the manna, the water from the rock, they weren't complaining about that stuff. The snakes wouldn't have come out and bit them. And actually, the serpents, the word there, serpents, translated seraph serpents or fiery serpents or venomous serpents, but the word seraph there means burning ones, burning, and it's the same word that's used for seraphim, the angelic order of seraphim. So it connects in well with Satan as being a fallen angel. So serpent and seraphim, there's a connect. Satan is a fallen seraph, and the burning ones is kind of they're the closest to close to God, on fire with love or kind of love for the Lord. I mean, if they're for Him or hatred against Him, love, hatred, burning with hatred against God. But so the serpents there could also just be it could also, the deeper meaning there is referring to they kind of complain to God, and so fine, protection. So they're getting, Satan and his demons or whatever have a little have free reign with the Israelites, and so they. But at that point, it wasn't like, well, they just stopped complaining, because they did. They stopped like, oh, well, we did this wrong. No, then God says the remedy is going to be this bronze serpent, and that points forward, actually, ultimately to Christ being lifted up. But they had food and water. They just didn't like it. They complained. Numbers chapter 26. Why another census? Why war? So these men they take another census, and men of and for war. So it's kind of a kind of men capable of war. So it gives this imagery of God's people as God is the king, and a king in Old Testament and ancient time wouldn't just be like, well, he sits on the throne, but also he would lead his people in battle. So this idea of you may have heard like the church militant here on earth. That the church here on earth, which is the church triumphant in heaven, which there's only one church. It's just kind of different, you could say, levels of the same church, same aspects of the same one church. There being God's people in the Old Testament is described as this kind of kind of God's army. And so they're to live for him, worship him, fight for him. So they take the men of age, and then the census comes up, and actually it's either, I don't know how to put it, either it's like the same amount or even slightly less than what was done at the beginning of the book of Numbers. You're like, God was providing for them, and they didn't grow. All right, they wandered for 40 years, and there was no growth. There was even some regression. It's the image. That's why the census again kind of, you took one already, and now you've been wandering. I've been feeding you, and you guys haven't grown because you guys have been complaining, etc. Chapter 30. I think it means 31 here of killing. Killing is okay. People put on the same level as animals, and women. It seems women are presumed to have been, if they were with the man, has sinned and shall die along with certain animals. This has to do with Midian here. Of God tells them to wipe out the Midianites. So this whole aspect. This can be a. We'll get. There's more of this when we get into Joshua. But like, why is God asking us? Well, first, when God released them from Egypt, God said, you'll come in and they'll just kind of scatter. People will scatter. In terms of they'll be cast out. And so let's see here. Yeah, they'll scatter. So the idea of it seemed like initially God, before they made the idol and everything, God was kind of promised, they'll come in and everybody will just like flee. All right, they'll like, you guys are all but after that, after turning away from God and all these extra laws, and the people's kind of turning away from God and the sinful, God's like, okay, it's going to be harder now. All right, and so there's going to have to be battles that take place. And so when they go into the land, we'll read of the people know, like, they're coming up against, they've heard about this God of Israel, the God of Israel, and the wonders and they hear about the other place. Instead of fleeing, they're attacking. So actually we'll see again and again them going out against Israel, and Israel actually first, before they enter the promised land, with Bashan, there's a couple of places on the eastern side of the Jordan before they enter the promised land that they start war with Israel. And Israel's like, okay, fine, you guys, we want to just cross through your land, but you guys are going to get, and God says, okay, take them out. But in terms of like, well, the deeper question maybe there is, well, how can God, can God really ask that? Well, he's the author of life and death, so he could, yeah, he can, actually. That's possible. Some want to, many more modern kind of people up-to-date scholars and stuff want to say, well, they did this took place, but this is really just it was a nationalistic movement in Israel, and so they wanted to show like God was all for their national imperialism and stuff, and but God's leading them, all right, and they're making all these mistakes, all right. It's these people like, if you want to show like you're a really good nation and like you got God behind you, why would you show you're doing all these rebellion? You're really, I think that argument just doesn't really hold a whole lot of water. That this is the scriptures and this stuff taking place, like in large, like it's showing all of Israel's failures and how they're rebelling against God. So that's not necessarily, if you're trying to create a narrative of, yeah, we're the greatest ever and we have God behind us, and why would you show all your infidelities and rebellion against God? The classical kind of, I say classical with fathers of the church, so for the first 500 years of Christian bishops especially, the writings we have, and then St. Thomas Aquinas, who does a lot of kind of summary of their writings, and kind of some synthesis later on in the high Middle Ages and such. This whole thing of like God allowing this, well, God's the author of life and death, and he could just wipe these people out. And we have to remember we had Sodom and Gomorrah, and so the level of depravity that was there, God decided to wipe out, and it's probably not much different in the land of Canaan right now with the pagan, cultures and stuff. You're like, well, why do they gotta wipe out everybody, or everybody except for children? Some of them is children and women that haven't had relations at all. Why just them? Why is everything else is kind of like child? Well, keep in mind the fertility cults, worship of, well, sexuality and stuff, kind of turning that into an idol. That doesn't happen in our day and age, fortunately. But that was very much part and parcel of these religions. That was the driving force of it. Was kind of their worship and stuff would include kind of sexuality, and so that's why God is so much in worship, like this ritual cleanness of He's not a God that's going to deify you know, sexual relations in terms of like make it into worship, public worship and stuff. No. God has a plan for that with marriage. All right, He does it there. But so the depravity of these cultures and stuff, we don't have accounts and stuff. But it wouldn't surprise me if they're so depraved. And actually, it's an act of mercy for God's part to wipe them out if He knows they're hard and they're not going to turn. And why would that be merciful, God? It's like it always seems like judgment. Well, actually, all of God's judgments, there's also justice and mercy. There's there's kind of both sides of the coin. So the justice is, okay, they're living fully contrary, living contrary to God's way, kind of their way that God wants them to live, willfully. And then secondly, it's merciful though, because by taking them, kind of ending it now, they aren't creating deeper and deeper hatred for God, turned against God. And so the more time God offers them and such, and graces that they refuse, or the more ingrained they get, the more their eternal separation from Him is going to be that more intense, because they hate God all the more. So there's certain of so we think of hell like, well, it's just like separation, everybody in one place. Well, there's kind of different even grades of just like Dante's Inferno. He gives kind of different circles of hell. Not that it's very much speculative of what he puts in those different groups and such, but it's this idea of the more I hate God, I turn against Him, the more I'm going to be separated. Further, I'm going to be separated from Him, and more intense my hatred for Him for all eternity is going to be, the rest of eternity. And so by then, it's the so in terms of the those with, it says women that have not known men, it's the idea of they haven't been tainted with this. They haven't been tainted with this culture, and the children, kind of, they aren't. Some of them is, let's see here. There's still hope for them. Other times it'll show up where they kind of just wipe them all out, because it seems perhaps the reason is it's so depraved. It's kind of crept into everything, and it's Now you're like, oh, well, what God going to do that again? Could He? No. Okay, cool. That, as I mentioned, the church, the ecclesia, Old Testament. Okay, the church kind of continuing on, fulfillment, kind of life here on earth. The church here. Okay, we're not going to. That's not going to happen. All right, Christianity has never promoted kind of all-out harem warfare, total warfare. Okay, so there's kind of just war theory amongst Catholic theologians and stuff. Defending self-defense and such. But so there's 200 years where this has never been invoked by the church. All right, and so we see this was under the old covenant, but it's but there's no precedent in the new covenants of this taking place. So it's just the way God decided. And also by having Israel do it, I mean, God could have just sent a storm or open the earth and everybody gets swallowed up, like He does on some occasions with some of the rebels, those that rebel against Moses. But part of having Israel actually go in there and do it, they see the depravity. All right, so they see it like, this is what's going to happen if we act like the other nations. This is the level that we're going to go down. Devalue ourselves, degrade ourselves. Sorry, but that was a long answer there. Mark chapter 20. So going into the gospel, Mark 9. Why are afflictions such as seizures referred to as being caused by evil spirits? So evil so it mentions this evil spirit, this man possessed, and he has seizures and stuff. And so it's important to note many more modern, read things and they'll have this idea of, well, back then in Jesus' time, they thought everything was caused by an evil spirit and stuff. Well, no. The fact is, Jesus mentioned there's illnesses and then there's evil spirits. So there's a distinction already of cast out spirits from some, illnesses from other. Now this one here is this guy's possessed, and so I'm not an exorcist, all right? I haven't been asked by the bishop to, and I hope that never happens. But in terms of they're possessed, they're going to do all they've kind of given in to Satan, and so there's a certain control he has over them. And so it's demonic possession in chapter 9 of Mark that's being taken place, and the disciples can't cast out the demon invoking Jesus' name, and Jesus comes down and takes care of it, and then he tells them, they ask, why couldn't we do it? And he says, some demons can only be cast out by prayer and fasting. Some Bibles just have the and fasting kind of, it's a note. Not all manuscripts have that, but it seems very, the tradition kind of, at least there's strong precedent that was something that Jesus taught, prayer and fasting, and even, so the early Christian writers, church fathers, are good witnesses of kind of the importance of prayer and fasting. So they can pray all they want, but this demon isn't coming out because you're not using all the tactics that all the weapons God wants you to use. And then last question here, Mark chapter 13, verse 31. Heaven will pass away. I thought we'd all be there. Or heaven say it's not so. We hope you'll all get to heaven, but Jesus says many are called. The way is narrow, so the many can never. And few will enter, so the few can never be many, and many will choose the path of kind of separation from God. But the quote there is from heaven and earth. It says, "Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away." So first of all, Jesus' words are more foundational than he's saying my words, what I say, my message is more firmer than the heavens and the earth. And then heaven and earth will not pass away. Heaven and earth will pass, but my words will not pass away. So his words will not pass. They're stable beyond that. And then heaven and earth will pass away. It's heaven. We think of heaven kind of like, well, that's where God is, the angels and everything, and that's going to all pass away. Well, heaven also refers to the sky in ancient languages and stuff. All right, they use the same word for the heavens, like we think of heaven where God is, and then also the sky. So there's different uses of the same word. So heaven and earth, creation will pass away, but my words will not. Well, where are we going to be then if creation passes away? Like, well, there's the new creation. This is mentioned in the book of Isaiah, toward the end of the book of Isaiah, as well as in one of Peter's writings, letters. I can't remember which one it is. I think it's the second one. But this new heavens and a new earth, kind of this kind of this recreation, something of the glorification of those who die and the resurrection of the life. There's kind of this new heaven. We have I don't know what it's going to be like, all right, but it's going to be paradise. It's going to be great because those there will be perfectly happy. So, yeah, thank you for all your questions. This one a little longer, but it did. So, God bless.